Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 25.6 support tier list. So if you content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There was only one change this patch. It was a nerf towards Karma. They took her Q damage down by 10 at all ranks. And this is meaningful. It hurts her trading, it hurts her pushing, it hurts her ability to translate early game advantages into late game power, which is something she does struggle with traditionally. Karma doesn't scale quite as well as some of the other traditional enchanters, and relies quite heavily on her trading and chunking people out, getting lane push to really make use of her kit. Her E build is still really good. The Moonstone Renewer, like Emax after like 3 points Q, can still function quite nicely, but it is meaningful amounts of damage to lose within the game. Other than that, no direct changes, so let's get into it. The D tier is going to consist of the same champions. We lead off with Mel, who is underperforming across all of her roles. She does just strictly need to be buffed. I would not recommend playing this champion, especially in support. I think support is the weakest of her three roles. Past that, yeah, just needs to be buffed. The champion's in a pretty dire spot at the moment. Malphite and Veigar are very gimmicky picks. They traditionally are paired alongside, in Malphite's case, Yasuo, in Veigar's case, Ziggs, and then utilizing their CC combo to kind of like snowball advantages within the game. I don't think they're horrible support options. Like, we've even seen the likes of Veigar support, if you play around this cage, be an actual functional standalone support, but nerfs towards his kit, like over time, to try and push him out of the bot lane, have hurt support quite heavily, and it's just a pick I wouldn't really recommend playing anymore. The case of Ashe, she's just an incredibly hard champion to pilot. You need to get really big early game advantages to make this kind of pick work. If you don't win lane, this pick is very much stunted. You are basically just a stand back poke and hope that like one ult can kind of translate into value pick, but then you don't have the traditional support alongside you because you are the support. So I wouldn't recommend playing this pick. I don't think it's a particularly good solo queue champion. You need to have some level of synergy with your ADC and understanding to really make value of this kind of champion. The case of Hui, he got nerfed, probably even over nerfed more recently. They took a lot of his chip damage away. It was meaningful for bot lane, for mid lane, for support Hui. He's a pick I wouldn't really recommend playing as much anymore, and he sits towards the lower end of the C tier. He does still value level scaling, and he does value getting a lot of items, and losing some of that power just means he's less consistently going to get to those points, and yeah, he sits towards the lower end of the C tier at the moment. Amumu isn't a bad champion, he's just stunted by poor itemization. His kit as a standalone is really nice for support. Two forms of crowd control on his Q, big crowd control ultimate on his R, relatively decent base damage, is a tank, pretty easy to pilot. There's a lot of things going for him. The biggest thing which isn't going for him though is just itemization. If even Child, like I mentioned over time, existed, this champion would genuinely be quite good at the moment. Case of Silas, he's actually quite a popular support. Actually, popular. He disproportionately to other non-support champions. He still maintains some level of player base, especially just as like a good counter pick option into good ultimates. He can function quite nicely as a support option. Blind Silas, definitely wouldn't recommend going there, but if you can find the right matchups as a support champion, he can be a good mid to support flex pick for you. Case of Renata, she's pretty heavily gated by specific team compositions. You want to pick her into something where she can get a lot of value out of towards like her ultimate, and you want to pick her with champions which can get a lot of value out of her W, out of her like just being able to pressure with like the passive. Things like Kalista obviously are very competitively skewed pairings, but she is fine. I wouldn't recommend playing her in solo queue. I think she's slightly underpowered, if anything, in solo queue, and is too predicated on the things which make her strong for competitive. But she's not a terrible pick. And same goes for Blitzcrank. I don't think Blitzcrank is a bad champion at the moment. I think he's just weaker than he has been, and he's just a big frustration problem in the case of Blitz, and that prohibits him from really being anywhere high up in this tier list. When Blitz is traditionally higher, he actually has a lot more things going for him. They've tagged a lot of his damage down, they've tagged his W movement speed, and all these changes have ended up being relatively meaningful and have left him more as a Q bot, reliant on like your ADC or one of your teammates like really following up to do everything else for you, and it's just a bit lower agency compared to what he has been in the past. So the B2 options are the likes of Teemo, who is a relatively high agency support. He has access to a lot of damage, can individually do a lot as a champion. Obviously doesn't have the tools which some of the other more traditional supports have, but the lower down you go, the more valuable this pick is. I wouldn't recommend playing him in like Diamond Plus, Master Plus, outside of very specific good matchups, but below that, he's a good scaling pick. His shrooms can be really powerful, his Q can be a really strong tool, he has good trading patterns. I think Teemo's a pretty solid support option. Tom Kench definitely has seen better days. I don't think Tom's a particularly good champion generalistically anymore. He suffers, especially in high elo. Another pick, kind of like Teemo, where the lower down you go, the more value you're going to get out of this kind of champion. Hart still performs really well in low elo. I mean, it performs decently in low elo. It's still underperforming compared to where it has been in the past, but is definitely a low elo skewed item, and that is the core item that Tom Kench goes. He is another champion which kind of suffers with not having the greatest other like alternative itemization, and is mostly gated to going the likes of Hart still. In the case of Shem, also, and Galio and Zac, all of these champions are solid options in the right spots. They can be used as flex picks. They are prohibited by itemization primarily. Shen is getting buffed next patch. Do I think that will shift him in the support role? No, but still, the W can be quite powerful into the likes of a Leona matchup. That's always one which comes to mind whenever talking about support Shem. In case of Pyke, he's an incredibly elite skewed pick. He can be very powerful if you are snowballing advantages, making use of his very strong high damage early game. If you fail to do that, he really struggles. He's a pick I wouldn't recommend playing unless you put a lot of time into him and you are very comfortable on the champion. The Umbral Glaive changed next patch is very low elo skewed. It's pure stats for the loss of some of the power on the passive. The passive is going to be more meaningful the higher up you go. Vision is more heavily utilized in high elo, elite, competitive, and yeah, they'll meaningfully do something to remove some level of elite skew. I don't think it by any means removes the elite skew. I think Pyke is still going to be a very elite skewed support, if not one of the most elite skewed supports, but does help in that aspect. Case of Alistar, Rakan, and Leona, these are some of your more standard support options. They are all decent. I wouldn't call them like the best picks at the moment. I think you need to be very like aware of your macro decisions, and you do lose some level of agency when you play these champions, but if you play them well, they are still some of the best of the bunch. They are still very much competitive mainstays at the moment, and people do really heavily value these champions. So if you are looking for something a bit more traditional, these picks can still be very good for you. They have access to good amounts of crowd control, but are very heavily predicated on good macro understanding. Seraphine, after her buffs, has definitely been doing a lot better. She is still a jack of all trades champion, having good crowd control, heals, shields, damage. There's a lot of tools this pick can bring. I don't usually recommend playing Seraphine outside of duos such as Ashe, but there are definitely other pairings which she can work with and be quite a potent support pick. The likes of LeBlanc, Zoe, Swain, these champions require a decent amount of gold traditionally to function, especially in the case of LeBlanc and Zoe. These picks do a lot of damage though, and if you ever are really accelerated, they can 1v9 games. You can have a lot of agency playing these kind of picks. Swain, I don't like him as a support, but he's doing a lot better ever since his most recent round of buffs. The champion is heavily predicated on playing into high HP, low damage team compositions, where you can consistently get multiple rotations of your ultimate off and just output a lot of AoE damage. Morgana and Brand are innately low elo skewed supports. They are picks I do not in the slightest recommend unless they are just outright overpowered. Brand is just weak at the moment. I think this pick should be an S tier option for low elo. He has been in the past. He is getting jungle buffs next patch, which don't help him for support. It's unfortunate. I think he just needs more than that. In the case of Morgana, her high ban rate prohibits her basically from ever being like an A/S tier option. The only time she ever really breaks that barrier is if her items are too strong, or like a new build maybe pops up and then that kind of falls into the same bracket / vein. So these picks, I wouldn't recommend playing them at the moment, but they are without a doubt low elo skewed champions, so you can find success and win on these kinds of picks. Moving up from the B tier to the A tier are Yuumi and Sona. So I think I dropped Sona down at some point. I'm like always mixed on Sona. I think Sona has a lot of issues, and a lot of the people who play her don't really play around some of her actual strengths. Like, Sona can trade back in lane. I think this is a heavily, like, misinterpreted thing about Sona, where you can go like 3 points Q. You can, I mean, even if you don't go 3 points Q, you can still output good amounts of damage. Obviously, if you just want to sit back, be like an enchanter bot, then WMAX can just be the way of playing her. But I do think you want some level of fight back in lane. You don't want to just fold, drop 30-40 CS on your ADC, and then spend the entire game trying to claw that back. I think that's a really hard way of going about the game. But I think Sona, yeah, if you play her more aggressively, honestly, and your pilot like spacing on the wave and like making sure you're not being hooked if you're playing into hooked matchups, this pick can be quite valuable still. I think she lingers as like an A tier option, but if you're very comfortable on her and you find success, she can be a very solid pick. In case of Yuumi, she is doing decently at the moment. I hate to say it, I don't like I don't like Yuumi as a champion. I think she has so many core issues with her kit. Obviously, the untargetability is the easier one to mention, but the fact that she really is quite prohibited in the ADC pairing she has because of some of the the levers that Riot have had to put on her, being like the on-hit healing, the crit modifier on it, just some of the changes they made to her. She is doing better though. The buffs which she received, I think in 2 different patches, really have accelerated her as like a solid option. You can pair her nicely with like your Zeris, your Twitches, and she can be quite a successful support option. She's also very easy to play, and you don't obviously have to do a huge amount of like macro thinking for yourself because a lot of that comes down to the ADC. Doesn't have a huge amount of agency, obviously, that goes without saying, but if you're very comfortable on this kind of pick, then yeah, she's doing decently at the moment. She's no longer a troll pick. She's actually going to find you some level of success. The case of Nautilus, he got buffed more recently, and he's been doing better because of it. The champion, obviously, is still to an extent kind of like in the same vein as like Leona, Rakan, Alistar, where they're a bit elite skewed. They tend to be heavily reliant on other people following up on them, and that can be a pretty mediocre way of climbing, especially through the lower ranks. Like, they're not champions I'd really recommend playing if you're like anywhere from maybe plat below, but like after and like you've gained more you gain more consistent, comfortable ADCs. These champions can be very successful ways of climbing. If you're looking for something with a bit more agency though, Elise, Pantheon, I really like these champions if you are very comfortable on them. If you're not, I would recommend avoiding them. They are very much like, yeah, Smurf, I just want to climb, get out of low elo, and then find kind of your footing the higher up the ladder you go. Same goes for Nico. Obviously Nico, Callista's a very common pairing, but Nico as a standalone support is a very solid option at the moment. Good early game damage, good CC, good value. I think Nico can be a really strong pick. Bard I really like as a champion. The joke with Bard is every 2 patches he tends to find a new build, and right now we're starting like Leandri's Bard. This champion does have good agency. He can output a huge amount of damage, but he is very hard to play well. And you will notice the difference between a good Bard's ultimate and a bad Bard's ultimate. So put a lot of time into this champion and you will be rewarded for it. I think this pick can output huge amounts of damage and can like do so much for laning phase, especially if you pair him with the likes of Jhin and have the follow up and the pairing necessary. I think this pick can be a very solid champion for any Arsenal. Fiddle and Shaco are some of your more unique picks. Even Zillion, I mean, obviously Zillion's main role is support, but these champions are picks you are not going to see for maybe like 300-400 games, and then you'll see them once, feel kind of 1v9 the game, and then you won't see them again. There's a reason they do that, because they are very solid options. They are traditionally OTP champions, like Zillion, Shaco, Fiddle are all very heavily OTP'd as support picks. I think Fiddle is a very unique champion. His ultimate is very powerful. Shaco's boxes are very strong, especially when you play him AP. There's always been this like sentiment around AP Shaco, when obviously he's played in the jungle, being kind of hard to work with because he doesn't come online particularly early, and he's very predicated on kind of relying the enemy to misplay. But Shaco support kind of removes a lot of the issues that Shaco jungle has, and can still be a very big nuisance scaling pick, and yeah, can provide a lot of value. Zillion, I really like for his movement speed. The value that movement speed has within the game, I think people have begun to realize is very high. Things like Swifties, Deadmans are very good items because of just how much movement they provide you with, and how you can escape from situations, chase down situations, and just maneuver around fights. In the case of Maokai, very easy tank to play in the support role at the moment. I do like Maokai as a support option. I think it's his best role for solo queue. If you want to play him in probably his best competitive role. Jungle Maokai still exists, it's just incredibly low agency. Support, traditionally, is just not going to be as high agency unless you really make use of like your macro and movement capabilities. If you say isolated within lane, you're kind of reliant on your ADC doing a lot of the hard work, but I think if you roam around the map, you can really give this role a lot of value, especially with some of the champions like your Maokais, your Leonas, with like your Symbiotic Souls, stuff like this, can be really powerful roaming picks. Senna, obviously play more like a utility slash enchanted champion at the moment. It's a very solid pick, very squishy. That is always the vulnerability when playing Senna, but the cleaver build can pair really nicely with like high AD compositions. The enchanted build with like your moonstones, your echoes of Helios, your dawn cores can be really nice if you get access to those items and you're playing with an ADC which perhaps wants those heals more than anything. Soraka as just an enchanter is still a very solid high A tier pick. I think Soraka is just a very good traditional option. She is probably the most traditional of the enchanter healer stereotype picks, and yeah, I would recommend playing her, having her within your arsenal. I think she's still a very strong pick if you're looking for something down that vein. Also, another pick really good with like the Ashe pairing, for example. The artillery options are like your Zeref, your Vel'Kozes, and your Lux. I still think these picks are all really good, especially if you accelerate them with gold. Zeref is being changed next patch. I think in total it will probably be a net maybe neutral for support. You'll be weaker early but stronger late. For mid, it will probably be net positive, so it's definitely something worth watching. Maybe support Zeref ends up being kind of your thing, like you really enjoy the champion, so it's definitely worth, if you're looking for something with a bit more agency and does a lot of AP damage, leaning towards some of these champions here. Thresh, I think is doing decent enough to like have him as like a high A2 option. Obviously, Thresh is heavily memed for like, if you ever have a bad Thresh, you will feel like you are playing the lane solo. Like, this champion can feel really lackluster, but he's been given a lot of damage over time. His Q has absurdly high base damage. His E, like the auto attack damage, has really high damage as well. There's just a lot of things which have been buffed over time on Thresh. His souls are like 1-to-1 conversion to AP armor, which is also really nice. There's just so many things which have really benefited Thresh over time, and I think he now sits as a really solid high A2 option. He's in fact probably doing better in solo queue than he is considered as like a competitive pick, when things like Aphelios and Jinx aren't as like prevalent there at the moment. Taric, Braum, you're great, are great defensive options. I love having these picks in the high A tier because I think if you and Poppy, I think if you bring them out in counter pick scenarios, they are some of the best picks you can lean towards. Poppy has obviously had a string of nerfs towards her support, but a lot of them have ended up being relatively neutral, and she's only really dropped from like the S to the A tier. She's not like considerably weaker. She is just a slightly more conditional option now. Braum, I love as a pick. I think into blind Nautilus and blind some of these like engaged supports, he is the best champion you can kind of lean towards. I think he has so much value. His CC, his peeling, there's just so many things which are like recommendable about Braum. Milio is another enchanter, which I really do recommend. He's a bit more conditional than Soraka. I think Soraka is very generic and can slot into a lot of compositions. I think Milio tends to be a lot more conditional, relying on like on-hit marksman to really get a lot of value out of his passive and his W. But even just like crit marksman, he seems to be really good with. He provides great shielding. His cleanse on his R is really valuable. And I think just have it for the amount of tools he has, he is a very solid, recommendable pick at the moment. Dropping down is Karma. I'm going to drop it down towards the lower end of the A tier. The nerf was meaningful. I mentioned it in the intro. I think the champion is considerably weaker. Your trading, your pushing power, and like your core like relevance early on to the game has gone down, and for a champion like Karma, that is very meaningful. If they nerfed that E-Shield, I don't think it would have been as meaningful, like if they'd nerfed the high end maybe, because then you'd be looking at more like a mid to late game nerf. But Karma's early is really important to her, and yeah, spiral down. So she does sit towards the low end of the A tier. The S tier is past that is going to stay the same. I think Rao is the best engaged option in the game at the moment. She has so much power within her kit, the CC, the crowd control value. Like she has actual damage and the yeah, just the tools she provides are really valuable, and I really do recommend playing her. If you want to play her though, you probably want to be banning things like the Poppy, because that can be really frustrating to play into. Some of the other picks here are the likes of Jana, who tends to be a bit more conditional, wants to play with heavy AD marksman and into like compositions where she can make use of her self-peeling tools and just general peeling tools. Zyra is the pick I recommend for like having the most agency at the moment. She does a huge amount of damage, and that can be really valuable. She's also a good flex pick if you are looking for something which can go both support and jungle. She just fall off with elo. Like you don't want to be playing Zyra as much the higher up you go. You want to be leaning towards something more traditional, or something like the Pantheon or the Elise if you want still a good damage option which has a bit more early game agency. But Zyra for low elo is perfect. I really do recommend this champion. And then Nami and Lulu still sit at the top. I with Lulu being nerfed next patch, Nami will probably be my recommended support. Nami is very good with almost everything. The E being able to work with abilities enabled her to be such a good pairing with your Brands, your Carthus's, stuff like that. So that really is a big strength of hers. She also pairs really nicely with like your Lucians still, and Lucian being buffed more recently really did help her. In the case of Lulu, she is a bit more conditional. You want to play her with like your Cogmores, your Twitches, your Jinxes, like your Hyper Carries. That is where like the real strength of the champion lies. She's being nerfed next patch. I mean, rightfully so. She has been one of the staples of the support role for quite a while now. Yeah, she's a bit more conditional than Nami. I recommend Nami as like the premier enchanter, but Lulu in the right spots is the best option there for you. And if you're looking for something with good engage, then Rel and like CC chain, then Rel is a really solid option. Those are the picks I'd really recommend of the patch. You Lulu, your Nami, your Rel. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.